Kids are staring at screens all day. Is that unhealthy? Experts can't agree. Every generation of parents faces its own new challenges. For the current crop of moms and dads, and in the midst of a pandemic, when screen time has in many cases become a necessity, rather than a choice, questions surrounding technology and adolescent mental health are among the most pressing and bewildering. Every generation of parents faces its own new challenges. For the current crop of moms and dads, and in the midst of a pandemic, when screen time has in many cases become a necessity, rather than a choice, questions surrounding technology and adolescent mental health are among the most pressing and bewildering. This expert debate is set against a backdrop of what most consider to be historically steep increases in adolescent depression, anxiety, and suicide, even before the pandemic. It's unequivocally the case that we have one of the worst mental health situations among our youth that has been documented, says Mary Helen Imerdino-Young, ed., a professor of psychology and education at the University of Southern California. That situation is showing no signs of improving. According to a 2019 report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services (HHS), suicide rates among Americans aged 10 to 24 increased by 56% between 2007 and 2017. Some of the most pronounced increases occurred among the very young. Suicide rates nearly tripled during that time period in kids ages 10 to 14. Trends in youth depression and anxiety are on similar trajectories, and young women seem to be experiencing these challenges more than young men. According to federal data collected from across the country, more than 1 in 5 adolescent girls experienced a major depressive episode at some point during 2018, the most recent year for which data are available. That represents an 84% increase during the past decade. Rates of depression among young women have risen steadily since 2009, which suggests the cause or causes of their struggles are the result of persistent phenomena. Is it coincidence that all this happened at the same time as the social media and smartphone revolutions? Could be, Imerdino-Young says. But even if it is, we know those two things are happening in the same people. She's referring to the evidence, which at this point is ample, linking some aspects of heavy screen use to an elevated risk for mental health problems among youths. One of many recent examples, a 2019 study in JAMA Pediatrics found that an adolescent's risk for depression symptoms rises with each daily hour spent on social media. But correlation is not causation, as every scientist knows. And some experts have posited that young people with underlying challenges may just be more likely to spend large amounts of time on tech, meaning heavy use as a byproduct of an underlying issue, not a cause or contributing factor. A large observational study from Canada just found that early mental health problems for girls predicts later social media usage, says Candace Odgers, Ph.D., a professor of psychological science at the University of California, Irvine. Recently, some of the loudest voices on either side of the screen time debate have started challenging one another's findings. She's referring to a 2019 study in Clinical Psychological Science. That same study also failed to find a connection between youth social media use and the later emergence of depression. Even if there is an association between kids and social media, I think it's more likely that the arrow goes in the other direction, so kids struggling have different viewing patterns, Odgers says. Some of her own recent work has concluded that the evidence linking daily digital technology use to adolescent mental health struggles is mostly weak and conflicting. Anyone who is raising, teaching, counseling, or coaching kids would breathe a deep sigh of relief if it turned out that popular new forms of digital technology are harmless. That's especially true right now, at a time when schools have been forced online and parents are desperate to keep kids occupied while they complete work or chores. But concerns surrounding kids and screens extend beyond the associations with mental illness. Questions abound about the cognitive and behavioral effects of media multitasking, online pornography, social comparison, and other elements of tech use. Some experts who have studied the effects of screens on young people say that a Pollyanna-ish view is not supported by the evidence. Recently, some of the loudest voices on either side of the screen time debate have started challenging one another's findings. A close look at one of these exchanges suggests that expert agreement may not come anytime soon, but that parent concerns about digital media are justified, if not yet proved. The dispute. Last year, in the journal Nature Human Behavior, two psychologists at the University of Oxford published an influential study that found a small association between digital technology use and lower well-being among adolescents. The study relied on large-scale survey data collected from kids and parents in the US and UK in an effort to contextualize technology's real-world effects among young people. The study looked at how some other common activities included in the surveys, such as listening to music or eating potatoes, stacked up to tech. The association of well-being with regularly eating potatoes was nearly as negative as the association with technology use, the authors of that study wrote. At the time of publication, these conclusions, and especially the potato comparison, garnered a lot of media attention. The take-home message was unambiguous: despite widespread concern among parents, there's little reason to fret about kids and screens. In the context of COVID-19 and nationwide stay-at-home orders, this message is surely music to the ears of cooped-up parents. And in an April New York Times op-ed titled "Don't Freak Out About Quarantine Screen Time," Andrew Przybylski, Ph.D., co-author of the above study and director of research at the Oxford Internet Institute, made this point more explicitly. The evidence linking screens to harm is, in reality, paper-thin, he and a co-author wrote. His op-ed made no mention of social media, arguably the screen-based activity that parents worry about most, and that has garnered the most scientific scrutiny, but it did highlight the possible benefits of video game play. Oxford's Przybylski is among the most outspoken critics of the "screens are harmful" narrative that has gained traction in recent years. Almost any high-profile piece that has lately challenged this narrative has highlighted his work or his words, or both. The homepage of his research project at Oxford not only calls into question the assumption that new digital technologies are imperiling young people, but it also casts doubt on the idea that the well-being of adolescents is in decline. Przybylski's views are contested. In a pair of recently published critiques, a group of U.S. researchers assert that some of his work is methodologically flawed and also misleading in the way it presents its findings. In one of those critiques, published April 17 in Nature Human Behavior, these researchers claim that, in his influential potato comparison study, Przybylski and his co-author engineered their analysis and summarized their findings in ways that minimize the negative effects of certain forms of digital technology. They have taken datasets that show a clear relationship between heavy social media use and poor mental health outcomes for girls, and they made a series of decisions in the analysis that obscure that relationship, says Jonathan Haidt, Ph.D., co-author of those critiques and a social psychologist at New York University's Stern School of Business. Lees, damned Lees, and Statics. Jean Twenge, Ph.D., is a professor of psychology at San Diego State University. In books and peer-reviewed papers, Twenge has made the case that smartphones, social media, and other aspects of today's popular screen-based technologies are contributing to the widely documented increases in youth depression, anxiety, and suicide. I think there is an increasing amount of evidence that the ways young people are using technology leads to mental health issues and poor psychological well-being, she says. In many ways, Twenge is Przybylski's antipode in the kids' screens debate. She is also, along with Haidt, one of the authors of the two recent critiques of Przybylski's work. Everyone can start with the same numbers, but the way you analyze those can lead to very different conclusions, she says. She argues that some of Przybylski's own study data show negative relationships between kids and aspects of tech use, but that his work tends to parse and present these data in ways that obscure any harms. Przybylski directs some of the same criticisms at Twenge's work. There are three kinds of lies, he says, quoting a line often attributed to the former UK Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. Lies, damned lies, and statistics. He says this in reference to a paper of Twenge's, published in 2018, that found that a young person's psychological well-being tends to decline as hours of daily screen time increase. He says that she and her co-authors cherry-picked outcome measures in an effort to make their results appear significant. In the introduction to his potato comparison study, he and his co-author Orban make a similar argument, namely, that much of the research that has linked screen-based activities to declines in youth mental health are influenced by researcher bias and data manipulation. In what they describe as an attempt to eliminate this sort of jiggering, they employ a complex method of statistical modeling called specification curve analysis (SCA). In a nutshell, SCA runs a large number of analyses based on a range of variables and outcomes and then comes up with cumulative effects based on the pooled results. When done properly, the theory is that SCA eliminates the temptation for researchers to cherry-pick variables and analyses that produce the largest effect sizes. But others say that SCA itself leaves plenty of room for researchers to steer the data in one direction or another. Their paper introduced this statistical technique, SCA, which looks very impressive because it reports tens of thousands of analyses, and some people writing about it seem to treat it as the decisive paper, says NYU's Haidt. But when we read the paper, a few things jumped out at us right away. First and foremost, he and Twenge say that, although the focus of their paper is digital technology use, Orban and Shabilsky chose to pool together all forms of screen-based media, including television. Haidt says this greatly dilutes the effect sizes of social media and the other forms of digital tech that most concern today's parents. They merge all forms of device use together, even though most kinds of device use are harmless, and they merge boys and girls together, even though the correlations are consistently larger for girls, he says. They do this in several other papers as well. Consensus, of a kind, while experts are often at loggerheads when it comes to kids and technology, there are places in which their views overlap. Cambridge's Orban says that, when it comes to kids and new digital technologies, it's complicated, and we should not oversimplify. At least their SDSU's Twenge seems to agree. The question of kids and screens is much more complicated than saying one thing is completely okay and one thing isn't, she says. While watching TV or playing video games isn't the best way that kids, and especially young children, can spend huge chunks of their time, Twenge says that most of her concerns center on the risks of smartphones and heavy social media use, which she defines as more than 2 or 3 hours a day. I think most people are wondering whether heavy users of these technologies have worse outcomes, she says. And the published data show that they do. She says that pairing social media with the attention-diverting, habit-forming, always-with-you qualities of a smartphone is an especially fraught combination. She also says that if young people are spending many hours a day online, then they don't have as much time for sleep, talking face-to-face with friends, or engaging in other activities that support healthy development. During times of stay-at-home orders, teens might not have the option of getting together with their friends in person. But they can video chat, she says. Since video chat is in real time and you can see the other person's face, it's preferable to the more curated and less interactive world of social media. Haidt says that, in the midst of COVID-19, parents shouldn't feel guilty about leaning on screens to help them occupy their kids and pass the time. I'm very pro-technology, and I recently bought an Xbox for my 13-year-old son so he can play with his friends during lockdown, he says. I think the research is becoming increasingly clear that screen time is not the problem. Social media is. He defines social media as any platforms or apps where kids create content that is commented on or rated by others, which tends to fuel social comparison and judgment, and also shaming and bullying. While he and other experts who study kids and screens debate one another, those who work directly with young people say the impact tech is having is apparent and, at least in some cases, detrimental. Smartphones and social media, this is certainly where they live and interact, says Jill Cook, Assistant Director of the American School Counselor Association. One of the problems is that these platforms allow young people to engage in activities they probably wouldn't be able to face-to-face. As an example, she says some students set up fake profiles and harass one another in ways they likely wouldn't, or couldn't, if they lacked the anonymity of a screen. We've seen students bully other students into harming themselves, she says. The rise in mental health challenges among teens is something she and other school counselors have noticed and discussed, and she says that tech often appears to be at the center of the issue. With social media, you're comparing yourself to whatever that perfect image is that people are putting out there, she says. That can be very hard, and we have to help kids navigate that in a healthy way. You can slice and dice the data up in different ways, but let's get real, she says. We need to think about shifting the ways in which kids use these technologies in order to leverage the benefits and attenuate the risks.